this is a this is often overlooked, and I hate to say it, but even cybersecurity specialists often overlook a client's website security, and it's a serious problem. The vast majority of you probably use WordPress as the platform. If you do any updates, you know what I'm talking about. You got the control panel and all of that. But there's really nothing special about a website server. It's a computer. It has an operating system. It probably has a database. Then it's got web server software installed on it. And then some other stuff called PHP, maybe web server software is typically Apache. That's what WordPress runs on for the most part. And it has a database, typically MySQL or some other, just regular database. And it's real easy for many of you now, if any of you have an e-commerce site, that's an investment, right? You know what I mean? It's, you're actively managing that, and it's got to be secure. But I suspect for most everybody on here, the website is just part of your marketing, and people unfortunately have a tendency to get website hosting as cheap as possible. And they often think, where they don't think about that it had all the software is on there, and it has security updates and patches that have to be performed just like you do on your Windows box or your Mac box or all the other equipment that's in your office, your iPhone and all of that, and just neglecting to update the website. And so what hackers do is they exploit security vulnerabilities that aren't patched. And so what it means is if you're not paying someone to make sure WordPress is kept up to date, Apache's up to date, Linux is up to date, and all these other different things, the databases and so forth, if you're not paying somebody to create, monitor, and manage all of these patches, your website's going to get weaker and weaker and weaker, and someday somebody's going to exploit it. I'm CEO, founder, and acting Chief Information Security Officer of Kirkham Iron Tech. And these are a couple of books, if you're interested, that are available on Amazon. And I've been doing this for 40 years, roughly, over 30 anyway. And we used to develop websites. So I'm kind of coming at this from the proper angle, the knowledge and things like that. I've updated websites and servers and things like that. But these days we outsource that to a company that does actively manage and patch the software. Okay. I got a slide here. We're one of the global top 250 managed security service providers globally. And that was last year. And we hope to get back on the list again this year. We're waiting to hear. At any rate, this is what we do. We manage cybersecurity services, and we make security job one for our clients. We also manage IT services, but security is job one. And then for larger companies, we co-manage different things. We have customers and clients that have IT professionals, and CIOs, and other staff, and they outsource certain components of their needs, especially cybersecurity. That's a really smart way to do it. And we in turn outsource some things, working in conjunction with our vendor partners. But getting back to the website and the importance of this, the last thing you want to have happen is to infect a site visitor, or worse yet, credit cards being stolen and personal information being stolen off of your website. You're asking them for their email and their name, typically, at the very least, so they'll sign up for newsletters and things like that. And it's a big problem. According to Symantec, almost 5,000 websites a month are compromised with just form jacking code. And what form jacking is, it's, you get a pop-up box and you download this. It's on our website. If you want to download some of our stuff, you have to fill out a form in order to get access to it. And the hackers can intercept that information. let's see, this one is by the second one here is by stealing 10 credit cards per website, criminals earn up to 2.2 million in these form jacking attacks, according to Symantec. And the usual statistic, and it depends on the research. This is from Statista. Others say it's 40%. So 40 to 60% of businesses that suffer a cyber attack go out of business within 6 months to 2 years after a significant cyber attack. So, the main thing, I think everybody's pretty aware, your PCs and, everyone's aware, hopefully aware of ransomware and other types of cyber attacks. But today we want to talk about the seriousness of this website and getting website hosting as cheap as you possibly can, or making the assumption that whoever built the site is making sure it stays up to date it's not a good practice, and it's an incorrect assumption. You'd be shocked how many people think, well, the website's built, that's all I need to worry about. And that's where you end up with statistics like these. So what are some of the vulnerabilities and the threats that are out there for websites? I mentioned the form jacking, grabbing that information. And sometimes a man in the middle attack is part of that. A man in the middle is a hacker maybe that is waiting on somebody to steal credit card information. They're making a purchase and they're stealing all the credit card information. Websites can be used to do what's known as a denial of service attack, or a DDoS, distributed denial of service. So they network all of these compromised websites, and they do things like attacking. Many of you may remember Verizon and I think AT&T, and maybe, well, I know Verizon was one of them. That the phone service failed all across the country because they were undergoing a distributed denial of service attack. So they networked together hundreds or thousands of these web servers and other devices to basically shut down a service for whatever reason. I think the Verizon one they were actually holding them hostage for, I want to say it was like $5 million to stop the denial of service attack. Compromised websites can also host malicious downloads, and many of these are silent. You don't even know that a virus is being downloaded and installed on your computer. And a lot of them can have scripting problems and cross-site scripting. And cross-site scripting in and of itself is not necessarily malicious. That spooky part of being in the internet world these days. You're looking for a new sofa, out on the internet, and you go to Facebook, and the next thing you know, all you see is sofa advertisements. That's a form of cross-site scripting, but it can also be much more malicious than just, doing the spooky, creepy stuff that we see all the time in our internet life. And there's many, many other things that they can do with a compromised website. So what are some things you can do to keep from having a website compromised? I already mentioned doing regular updates, and it's not just WordPress. All WordPress sites have many other components installed on them. They're known as plugins, and those plugins, there's just a piece of software, and it has to be kept up to date. There's always patches for plugins and things like that. So it's not just WordPress. It's not just the plugins, but it's also all the other software that computer uses to host your website. All of those have to be patched. And like I said, if you're not paying somebody to do it, or you're not doing it yourself, it's not being done. Very rarely. Very, very rarely. So if you're using GoDaddy as a hosting platform and you're paying the $8 or $9 a month, that doesn't include updating. I think you can do an add-on now with GoDaddy, and sometimes they'll keep WordPress up to date, but they won't patch the plugins because they can present a problem, and if they have a problem, that's really outside their scope. Now, our systems patch plugins, and they're designed to do it's all code, software code, and it's all automated, but it has a way to check to make sure the site's not broken after applying the patches. And if it is, it'll roll it back, put back the older software. It's all automated and things like that. We still stay on top of it for a lot of different things. I can't stress the importance of having very complex passwords on your website, 90% of you reuse your passwords. Even though 60% of you know you shouldn't, this needs to be not only complex, but it needs to be unique for the website. And it should be unique for all the users on the website. So maybe you have a login, you have a set of credentials, and maybe your website developer has a different set of credentials. That's good security practices. Okay. And as I've said over and over, for managing IT and all the other cybersecurity stuff, you need a skilled security team. This is, for the most part, it's not do it yourself anymore. Our WordPress hosting, we do this for clients. You have to already be a client for us to website host, and we only do WordPress. But the company that does ours has a security team, making sure the servers themselves aren't getting compromised, and they're responding and monitoring and responding for intrusions and with automated and manual tools, just like we do for our clients' IT infrastructure. And it's just another thing that you need a skilled security team of somewhere involved with that. So they can do things like rollback if there's a problem with a plugin update, so your site doesn't go down, things like that. I already mentioned this, security plugins and services. So you can do security plugins to add things like multi-factor authentication, to do things like automated backups. That's another service that our website hosting provider does. And if you're interested in who that is, it's called Flywheel. And I believe they're part of WordPress Engine, which among WordPress hosting providers, that's about as good as it gets. And they do all of these things for you. Outsourcing is a good thing when it comes to website hosting and security monitoring, and you get all of these things with it. Maybe multi-factor authentication, it will either send out a text message, or you punch in a 6 or 8 digit number in addition to your username and password. So that way, if you are guilty of reusing your passwords and somebody has the credentials to the website, they still can't get into it because they don't have that 6 or 8 digit number that is only valid for a minute or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on what platform you're using to manage your multi-factor authentication. Incidentally, a good password manager can also do your multi-factor authentication and automatically enter all the credentials. So it actually is better security, and it's fully automated. So what's at stake? Just like for everything else in your business, loss of reputation and respect. You could be subject to fines. If you got a website around health, you log into your hospital website or your doctor's website information, like Epic, if you're familiar with that. That manages health information. So your website has to be HIPAA compliant as well if you're in the healthcare industry. And there's all sorts of other compliance depending on what business you're in. You could have a productivity loss, especially if you have an e-commerce website. Your company's down if your website's down. May not be able to pay bills, make payroll. And above all else is you've got a responsibility, regardless if you don't have compliance requirements. You've got an ethical responsibility that your client or customer data is not breached. Just username and password is enough. If you're in New York State, California, there's laws that if you have a resident of those two states in your company's database or on your website, you're required by law to have that protected and have security already in place. And these things are what leads to that almost, 50%, roughly 50% of the businesses that go out of business because of a significant security attack. So what else? How do you go about this? How do you take that first step? And this applies not just for websites, but it needs to be considered when you're doing a risk assessment. This is a risk assessment. It's a gap analysis. It's about It's the first step of the NIST cybersecurity framework. You got to know the condition of your ship before you set sail. It's about not only understanding what vulnerabilities you have, but acknowledging them and take steps to address them. That's the second step in a NIST cybersecurity framework analysis. The third one is you've got to have an intrusion detection system and an intrusion prevention system already in place, monitored, responded to by information security specialist. That's what we call it in the business, InfoSec. You guys probably just think of as cybersecurity experts, but you've got to have them already in place. Waiting to address any sort of issue, whether it's a breach on your website or inside the company network or in your cloud provider, which is also related to website hosting, I might add. Waiting until after the fact to bring in a InfoSec specialist is a whole different game. You know, it's a lot cheaper, a lot smarter, and it's going to make the chances of you having a breach magnificently lower by already having that team engaged. And they're going to help you with the assessment. They're going to help you and recommend things to do to improve your security. And ultimately, you fill those gaps. You address those vulnerabilities. And then, of course, if all else fails, they're going to respond with a recovery. And that recovery may be a broken website, a bad patch, or it could be a natural disaster and other things that affects your business continuity. And these are standards, right? Any good information security specialist already knows all this. They will verify that all of these things are exactly right. It's not just me. It's not just my opinion. It's the way things are done. It's best practices. And that's what we encourage, and that's the purpose. That's my job. I'm really chief evangelist, and more than anything in the company. So what does that look like? You know, what is a gap analysis, or what does this risk assessment look like? Well, we have some samples here, and this is, you know, some of these gaps are also to determine, are you investing right, properly in IT? But from a security standpoint, this is an example of a report. So the one on the left is the initial assessment. Green, good; red, bad; yellow, iffy, right? So at the end of this is the report. There's no manage, detect, and response, which needs to be on web servers. And if your cloud provider, and I mean cloud provider, not just the website hosting provider, if you're using cloud services and they tell you you don't have to worry about it because it's hosted at Amazon AWS or Microsoft's platform or Google's platform, you know, and I've heard them say it coming right out of their mouth and say, we don't have to worry about security. That's a falsehood. That environment has the same security issues as the desktop or your laptop. And any cloud provider that tells you that, run. Okay? It's simply not true. And I've had friends that believed that. They trusted the cloud provider and ended up getting held for ransom. Ransomware attacks can happen to any type of cloud service. It is indeed true that Amazon and Microsoft's platform and Google and many other and our cloud services, it is inherently very, very secure before you install anything on it. In other words, before you put a web server up, before you post your website on it. And the moment you start using those platforms, they get weaker and weaker and weaker because the software itself, just the sheer volume, number of applications are running, and nobody's paying any attention to intrusion. They're not patching right. They're not maintaining software updates to all these different pieces. So when these cloud providers, website providers have a breach, it's usually not the infrastructure itself. That's usually very, very secure. It's because of somebody's not monitoring, no one's patching the software, and other things that can happen inside of a cloud environment. Just if you take one thing away, and lumping website hosting is cloud services, lump them all together and just pay careful attention to any cloud services you have. Okay? Make sure they're patched. Make sure you understand what that service provider is doing when it comes to security. Now, second step is to protect, right? Getting back to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So we did a risk assessment after deploying this better enterprise grade security, implemented multi-factor or two-factor authentication. Sometimes we do managed DNS services. That's a component of security beyond the scope of this one. Maybe we'll do a deeper dive on that, Kenzie. You know, you've got to have all of these things in place. And so that's your future state. But it all begins with doing that assessment. I can't stress it. And in most cases, a good security service provider, they have both free and paid ones. You know, we start getting into compliance and regulations. The paid ones are going to get you to compliance a lot quicker. But roughly, you know, they're all based on NIST cybersecurity framework and other industry standards that have been built over years and years and years. It's best practices, as we like to say. So it's kind of a quick topic. Be happy to take any questions in. There's Mr. Haynes. Mr. Haynes, what criteria and steps should businesses follow to ensure they are selecting a reputable and trustworthy cloud service provider that can guarantee the security, reliability, and compliance necessary for their data and applications? That's a great question. One of my favorite questions is asked, tell me about your security. And if I hear that, if a cloud service provider is saying you don't have to worry about security because it's in the cloud, that's a red flag. For the major service providers and cloud services, most of them have statistics regarding uptime. You want to look for 4 nines or 5 nines, 99.99%, you know, that kind of stuff. Our cloud's never been down. Now, we've had, you know, maybe some software in the cloud that we've installed that's been down, but our data center's never, ever been down. I hope I can always say that, but there are no guarantees. You know, Amazon, as good as it is, periodically goes down. Some of you may be using Microsoft 365 or Office 3, whatever it's called this week. You know, your Outlook and all of that's in the cloud, and those services go down. You know, and they actually, Microsoft's downtime is higher than ours. That's one of the reasons why we still offer Exchange email hosting. Make sure I got all of the and the compliance necessary. You've got to be, one of the things that I talk about on our main webinars is understanding what your industry standards are. You should know that. It's your responsibility to know what those are. Now, the good news is I don't have to be an expert in law and the rules of professional conducts, or if you're in an accounting business, all the ethical requirements that your state may have, your accounting society or your bar association, because no matter what those compliance issues are, for the most part, everything that we provide is going to address it. And for most people, it's going to be a dramatic increase in security. And I think I answered all of your deals there, Jay, and compliance necessary for the data and applications. But yeah, I want to touch on that a little bit more. Is you know, if you think about the specialty that you may be in. Let's say you are a law firm and your area of specialty is intellectual property. Well, you've got a different risk assessment or a risk profile than, say, a personal injury law firm, because you got different compliance issues. In the case of intellectual property, you have to worry about China, you know, stealing intellectual property. There's many experts out there say that the amount of intellectual property that China has stolen over the last 20, 30 years is the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. You know, some of the cities in China are far or more advanced than any Western city I've been in. And you don't go from practically third world to best technology in 30 years without stealing a lot of intellectual property. So, but those are things you just have to think of. These come up in the risk analysis, especially firms that have done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. They're going to be probably going to be up to speed on any uniqueness of whatever industry you may be in. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm going to call it a wrap. And this is our contact info. Feel free to reach out if you think of something. Be happy to help you with it. Like I said, this is kind of my job, and to promote cybersecurity awareness. Thanks again for attending, everybody.